Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about emotions, where our emotions come from, and how we express those emotions as well. So there's three different components of an emotion. We don't really think about this when we have an emotion, but there's three different parts to an emotion. There's a physiological component, so like a physical sensation that we have when we have an emotion. If we're stressed out, our heart might be racing, we might sweat. So we have different physiological changes that can happen when we have an emotion. Then we also have emotional feelings, and we also have thoughts about those feelings and thoughts that actually create those feelings as well. So feelings and thoughts are a big component of emotions as well. And then we also have the emotional expression. How do we express that emotion? How do we read that emotion in other people? And then how do they read it in ourselves? So we have like seven basic emotions. I don't know, seven universal facial expressions, I guess. And these are universal all around the world, which is kind of interesting. So if somebody looks angry at you in another country and you don't speak their language, they're angry with you. So you can just tell by looking at somebody's face how they're actually feeling. And some feelings are, I think, a little more subtle, a little more difficult to tell. But these are the seven universal facial expressions: happiness, surprise, sadness, fright, disgust, contempt, and anger. And the better you know the person, the better you might understand their emotions and what those emotions are. So that's kind of interesting as well. And they also said that we have more negative emotions than we do positive emotions. And that sounds kind of bad, but I think that negative emotions are actually more necessary for survival rather than the positive emotions. So Paul Ekman is a guy that has been studying emotions through his whole psychological career. He's a psychologist, and he actually started out studying the facial expressions of these indigenous people in New Guinea. So this was a tribe of people that they discovered in New Guinea, I think in the 1950s or so, and they had not had any contact with the outside world. So all the scientists were really excited and interested in studying them and really trying to understand if they're different than we are, or how are they similar to us. And what Paul Ekman wanted to know was, do they have the same facial expressions? Do their facial expressions mean the same thing that our facial expressions mean? And what he found was yes. So one of the things that he did was he he asked them to have a particular emotion, show a particular emotion on their face, and then showed them to Americans and other people to see if they could read those emotions accurately, and we were able to do that. And then they looked at pictures of us having particular expressions, and they were able to read those emotions as well. So we have universal facial expressions, which means that we all have those same facial expressions. Now, how emotions are expressed can be a little bit different across cultures. Some cultures are very expressive in their emotion, very open in their emotion, and then others are much more reserved. But the emotions are still the same, and the facial expressions are still the same. Blind children who have never been able to see actually have the same facial expressions, despite not being able to see those facial expressions or read those facial expressions in other people. So facial expressions seem to be hardwired. They're not something that you learn. It's something that you already are born with, which is kind of interesting. Autistic children often have trouble understanding facial expressions and emotions, and what those facial expressions and what those emotions mean as well. So that's kind of interesting. So not only do our facial expressions, tell other people what our emotions are, but our facial expressions actually tell us what our emotions are, which is interesting. So our facial expressions actually tell our brain how we're feeling. So if we're smiling, our brain gets the message that we're happy. If we're frowning, it gets the message that we're sad. So really, really kind of interesting. So there was this study done at University of Irvine in California, and they did this selfie study, and they put people into three different groups. One group was told to take smiling selfies. The other group was told to take a picture of something that would make somebody else happy, one of their friends happy. And then the third group was to take a picture of something that made them happy. Now, which group do you think reported the best mood? So each group was actually supposed to rate their mood 3 times a day and enter their mood into an app. So I think it probably reminded them, and they just put it in there. How are you feeling at this particular moment? And then at the end of the week, they looked and to see who had the better mood. And wouldn't you know it, it was the group taking smiley selfies. And the reason why this was the case was because that act of smiling actually picks up your mood. It actually sort of tricks your brain into thinking you're happy. So if you're ever feeling kind of down, put a smile on your face, pretend like you're happy, fake it till you make it, and you'll actually feel a little bit better. And that's what we call the facial feedback hypothesis. So our facial expressions actually influence our emotions and our emotional experience. Smiling will actually improve your mood. Your facial muscles actually send messages to your brain. And I wanted to make sure to give you, and Ekman was also the psychologist that developed this idea as well and proved that this actually does happen. And one of the things about the difference between like an emotion and a mood is that an emotion is kind of a short-lived experience, whereas a mood is a little bit longer-lived experience. Emotion is happiness, but a mood is, a long-term feeling of happiness and contentment. So just to give you a little insight on that, this is the last slide in this video, and this is Amy Cuddy. I don't know if any of you have heard her. I think I put her video on as an extra credit assignment because I really like it. Her message is fake it till you become it. So a lot of times she talks about imposter syndrome and how we often feel like we don't belong in certain places, and we don't know exactly how we got here to college or wherever it is. And she's, her message really is good, that none of us really we feel like we're 100% capable all the time. We all have self-doubt at times, and that you just have to push yourself through that self-doubt sometimes, and you can be really successful in life. But her research has been questioned of late, and so sometimes people aren't putting this in here. She's been used she did a TED Talk, and a lot of business classes have used her ideas. What she talks about is how our body language actually sends a message to other people, how we hold ourselves. But her research had shown that, it also sends a message to our brain just like our facial expressions do. However, they found some flaws in her research, and now we're not really sure that that's the case. Kind of makes sense, and it absolutely makes sense that our posture and how we hold ourselves it has an impact on how other people see us, and probably does have an impact on how we see ourselves as well. So if you have a more powerful posture or confident posture, your brain gets that message that you're confident and brave and powerful, even if you're not, really, even if you don't believe it. So her ideas, I think, are good, and that just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Just means you got to push your way through it, and you'll get there, and you'll be much better on the other side. So thank you for listening.